Well, thank you. Here we are. Thank you all to the viewers and to the candidates. Welcome to the Toronto Centre All Candidates Debate on Climate Change. I'll be your moderator for the hour. My name is Angela Bischoff and I'm Campaigns Director for the Ontario Clean Air Alliance. We're a nonpartisan organization working to transition Ontario to a 100% renewable future. We see a need for bold leadership on climate and want every party to do more to address this challenge. I'm honored to be here in Toronto on the traditional territory of many First Nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. We are in a climate emergency, from raging fires to droughts to melting glaciers and collapsing ice shelves. It's clear we are well into the danger zone. Yet Canada has missed every single emissions reduction target it has ever set. Canada can and must do so much more to reduce our climate impact. And that's what we're here to debate today. There will be a federal by-election in Toronto Centre on October 28th. We invited the candidates of the four major parties to share with us their ideas and party platforms around climate change. I thank the NDP and Green Party candidates for accepting our invitation. The Liberal and Conservative candidates, unfortunately, declined to participate. And a big welcome to our viewers, for which the climate emergency is a critical issue. As your moderator, I'm tasked with ensuring that the rules of the debate are respected. The initial speaker order was randomly selected. Thereafter, we'll rotate speakers. There will be an opening round where each candidate will get 90 seconds to introduce themselves. Following that will be a series of questions where each candidate will get 90 seconds to respond. To ensure that the candidates stick to their time, I'll ring a bell indicating 15 seconds to go, and I'll follow up with a verbal time's up. Each candidate will also get 60 seconds to rebut each other after each question. Just raise your hand if you wish to rebut, or interrupt me if I miss you. For the viewers, we've disabled the chat box because we're all here to hear from the candidates themselves. But we've opened the Q&A section where you can type in any questions you have. And at the end, if there's time, we'll try to fit in some of your questions. So that's it for the rules. Let's hear from the candidates themselves on why they think they're the right person to represent Toronto Centre. So first up for opening statements is Brian Chang of the New Democratic Party of Canada.
Hi there. Hi, everyone. My name is Brian Chang, and I'm so happy to be talking to everybody today. My preferred pronouns are he and him and his. And over the course of the next hour, I'm proud to talk about priorities that I have and that New Democrats have for here in Toronto Centre, but across the country as well, too. And that means things like head-to-toe healthcare, making sure that people have access to the medication they need so that they can be healthy. This was an idea that was pioneered by NDP, Tommy Douglas, well over 60 years ago. And other innovations like universal basic income that NDP MP Leah Gazan is pushing for with Motion 46 in the House of Commons. And when it comes to tackling the climate emergency, it's something that I've been doing for a long time. I have my master's in environmental studies from York University. I have my undergrad in environmental policy from the University of Toronto. And I look forward to working with allies like the Clean Air Alliance, like Greenpeace, like the Canadian Environmental Law Association, two organizations that I've spent a lot of time doing work with, volunteering with, and being on the board of directors for. And working with other community groups like Indigenous communities, like the City of Toronto, like eco-justice and environmental defense, to make sure that we are meeting the needs of what the community is looking for. What it comes down to is making sure that people are always put front and center in all of our work towards environmental justice, and ensuring that as we move towards a just recovery, that everyday people are covered. So I look forward to talking to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. And Annamie Paul, Green Party of Canada.
Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to be with you. My name is Annamie Paul. I'm your Green candidate in Toronto Centre and also the new leader of the Green Party of Canada. You know, it's first I want to thank Angela for the event, the Clean Air Alliance for the event, and thank Brian for coming. I believe that real representation for people in Toronto Centre starts before you get elected, and these are the opportunities to talk with people in the community. And it's extremely disappointing when candidates don't show up for these community exchanges. In terms of the climate, there is no question that this is the existential threat of our times. And that we can't forget about it because it hasn't forgotten about us. Even as we struggle, and Toronto Centre more than most places in Canada, with this devastating pandemic that has taken so much from us. And so while people are struggling to meet their urgent needs, we first have to remember that the role of government should have been to make sure that we were more resilient at this time so that we weren't plunged into such difficulties as soon as the pandemic hit. And so that people who should be able to concentrate on being allies in fighting against the climate emergency actually have the opportunity to do it, because they're not concerned about how they're going to pay their bills, where the childcare is going to come from, how they're going to get the healthcare that they need. And so we have an extraordinary opportunity to tackle the climate emergency by accelerating our transition towards a green economy. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So maybe you didn't hear my first.
I can't hear the bell. This was the same thing in the last debate. I cannot hear the bell at all.
Can you hear that?
When you do it like that, but I did not hear it at all.
I'll be better. Please wrap up. I'll do that.
Okay, so yes, I'll wrap up. And that is going to require true political leadership. And so that is what the Green Party is here to offer. That is what I'm here to offer for residents of Toronto Centre, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you, Annamie and Brian. Okay, the first question. Under the Paris Agreement, the Government of Canada has promised to reduce its climate pollution by 30% by 2030. But Canada is not on track to meeting even this modest goal. According to the Parliamentary Budget Officer, Canada could achieve its 2030 climate target by simply raising its price on carbon. Do you support raising Canada's carbon price? If yes, by how much? And the first question goes to Annamie.
The quick answer is yes. Carbon pricing has conclusively been shown, and there is an international consensus that it's the most efficient, cost-effective, and impactful way for us to get to our greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets. It's not the only thing that we can do. I mean, there's a mix, and actually carbon pricing has the effect of incentivizing other activities that help us to reduce our greenhouse gases. But Angela, coming back to your first point, which is that we're not even going to make our 30% target, it's, you know, it is extremely, again, disappointing. I'm very disappointed, Angela, that our government continues to hold on to a target that does not correspond to the science. This applies to, unfortunately, to the NDP as well, who is stuck to a target that is just slightly more than half of what the IPCC has said is needed. If we do not get serious about a plan about our targets, then we're not responsible international citizens, and it's communities like Toronto Centre that get hurt first and worst by our changing climate.
Thank you. And Brian?
Just a clarification, do I have 90 seconds or do I have 60 seconds?
90.
90 seconds, okay. Thank you very much. And then we have 60 seconds for rebut after.
Right.
Correct. Okay, great. Thank you. Fantastic. So I share the disappointment that Annamie has, and I think this is something that many Canadians are feeling a lot of anxiety around, not being able to meet what our international commitments are, and then seeing climate fires and not knowing and feeling helpless and not able to take action on those things. So New Democrats recognize this, and we see it. It's how do we build a structural change into the government, into policies, into institutions, so that 14 years from now, we're not having the same discussion. Just like 14 years ago, we were having the same discussion about how we were meeting. It was a different international agreement. It was a different target, but we keep missing them time and time again. Democrats recognize the need for bold, radical action now. Our plan has put forward how can we structurally change? How do we get our buildings to not be reliant on on emitting greenhouse gases? How do we make them more efficient? How do we transition jobs away from resource extraction towards renewables? How do we move our government to recording and keeping itself accountable with the Climate Accountability Office? How do we structurally change the system so that we don't keep having these issues over and over again? And that's something New Democrats will present, and I 100% support carbon pricing and increasing taxes to meet our targets over time.
Thank you. Annamie, would you like to respond to Brian?
Yes, just to underline what I said again, I don't see how the NDP can suggest that they have a bold plan and that they're committed to tackling the climate emergency when they refuse to adjust their targets to where they should be to correspond to the science and to our obligations under the Paris Agreement. Certainly carbon pricing, as I said, is a key element, and the Green Party is committed to raising it incrementally until we reach those targets. But you simply have got to have the right target in the first place. And I would love to hear from Brian, you know, what the plan is there. It's 38%. I don't believe that it's changed. It should be between 55 and 60% reductions when compared to 2005 levels. And so I would like to know what the plan is for that.
Great. And Brian?
Yeah, and so I hear what Annamie is saying, but what we're talking about is how do we get to plans not only just to 2030 and just what the Paris climate initiatives are. We're going to be entering a new round of negotiations next year in Chile, and we want to make sure that we're bringing something meaningful towards the table. What the real enemy here is the Liberals. Let's be very clear. Annamie can talk about NDP goals as much as possible, but the inaction is not coming from the NDP caucus. The NDP caucus has been very strong about fighting for the environment. You will see NDP MPPs fighting for that in Ontario. You'll see them fighting for it in BC. You'll see them fighting for it right across the country. I would like to join that caucus to fight and be a voice for Toronto Centre and the climate anxiety that we are all feeling here, and knowing that policies are out of our control because the Liberals keep promising and are not following through on their obligations. So there is a long-term plan that we have to get to 2050. There are benchmarks for 2030. There are benchmarks for 2025. There are lots of different plans that we have in place. There's no one key answer. And our policy is not about digging a hole and filling it in. It's about how do we build capacity over time and make sure that we're creating that structural systemic change.
Great. Okay, thank you both. Let's go to the second question. The transportation sector is Canada's second largest source of greenhouse gas pollution. What should the Government of Canada do to support transit, electric vehicles, and smart cities to lower transportation-related emissions? Starting with Brian.
Thank you. In Toronto Centre and right across Toronto, we would know what the value of fare-free public transit would be. And it's something that New Democrats have talked about for a really long time. It's absolutely heinous that you can be fined $30 for parking on the wrong side of the street or in a no parking zone, but you can be fined $450 for not paying for a transit fare. It's absolutely wrong and criminal, and it is an issue of environmental justice. So when we're talking about making sure that communities have what they need so that they can make impactful decisions on the environment, it means about making sure that we have ways for people to get around, to get to their jobs, to not be stressed out, packed like sardines in the middle of a pandemic on the TTC, making sure that they have access to high-speed public transit that can get them around in a very healthy way. New Democrats have talked about a national electric car vehicle grid, making sure that we have a renewable energy strategy, making sure that we're participating in the electrification of vehicles and moving towards zero-emission vehicles as well too, and building out that capacity right across the country. And we've talked about working with other partners like Canada Post and potentially using postal outlets as places for renewable energy and car charging stations. So there's a lot of opportunity to talk there, but I want to make sure that we remember that people are at the center of it and how do we get them around the city in a safe way.
Great. Annamie.
So for many people in Toronto Centre, of course, the idea of owning any private vehicle is just simply a fantasy. This is a riding where almost a third of people and more than 40% of children live below the poverty line. We need, in their case, to be focusing on public transportation and on making it as accessible, as frequent, and as inexpensive as possible. We're living in a pandemic now, and there are many people who are afraid of taking public transportation. And so we need to be thinking about how to incentivize and educate people about the safety of public transportation. This is something new. We also need to redesign our cities and give our municipalities the certainty, fiscal certainty, and the planning certainty they need in order to create those smart cities that you were mentioning, in order to make sure that people can work more closely to where they live, that they can access more places as a pedestrian, as opposed to needing any form of transportation at all. And so that is something the Green Party has been talking about. You know, I would say that I know that for someone with Brian's background, it's got to be difficult to present policies that you know do not correspond to the science, coming back to our previous question. You know, we need a target between now and 2030. We've been told by the IPCC what it needs to be. There simply is no way of dancing around the need for that because you can't plan for what you don't identify.
Thank you. Brian, would you like to respond?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. So when we're hearing questions about what it means to get around the city, I think about one of my best friends who works for a bank and has had to continue to go to work throughout this pandemic, and the stress and fear that she has, where sometimes she's breaking down into tears on the TTC because she's so stressed out that people are so close to her, that she's worried about getting sick and she's worried about infecting her family, but she has no other way of being able to get around the city because it takes an hour to get to where she needs to go to by transit to work in Toronto Centre. These are the stories that I can't separate from the moment that right now, when we're talking about the environment, we can't create this anxiety that people feel inertia, that they feel so terrified that they can't take action on environmental issues. And one way that I think that New Democrats can bring this forward is really by pushing for fare-free public transit, which will make an impact on my friend's life and so many Canadians right across Toronto and the country.
Thank you, Brian. And Annamie?
Yeah, there's no doubt that you know, there's no climate justice without social justice, and in the context of Toronto Centre, you see that much more clearly perhaps than in other parts of the country, where there's so many people struggling with the impacts of our lack of a complete social safety net. And it's not just, as I said, because they can't be allies, but also also because, you know, we see the intersection of the two issues when we don't have social justice. And so anyone hoping to represent Toronto Centre has to keep that in mind. And, you know, I'm sure that we both do, and be working holistically to look at every single thing that is preventing people in Toronto Centre from having the air quality that they deserve, from having the services they deserve, so that they can also, you know, help to tackle the climate emergency.
Super, thank you both. Okay, the third question. Homes and buildings are Canada's third largest source of climate pollution. Most are heated by fracked gas from Western Canada and the US. What should the government of Canada do to reduce fossil energy heating in our homes and buildings? Annamie.
This is one of the areas that we diverge wildly from the Liberals, Conservatives, and NDP. During our leadership race and during the 2019 election, we made it very clear that fracking has got to end, and it's got to end right away, not only because of its impact on global warming, but also because it poisons ground supplies, because it causes earthquakes, and because it infringes upon Indigenous self-determination and sovereignty all over the country. So we're very clear, it has got to stop. It is not a transitional fuel. It is not a clean fuel. We need to be moving as quickly as possible towards a truly green economy based on renewable energy. It's very possible. We're going to be spending billions of dollars very soon, and that money should be going towards accelerating that transition towards a net zero economy. It just requires true political leadership.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you. So in terms of natural gas, there is so many of the homes, especially in Ontario, are designed towards this. So we have to remember that there's a huge cost on people that's involved in this process. And New Democrats have a plan to work on towards energy retrofits. And even some of the own research that you have on your website, Angela, actually shows how there's a lot of opportunity for energy efficiency. The return on investment per dollar invested in energy efficiency is so much higher than anything else we could do, including investing in renewable energies. Our building right now actually has no heat because we're going through the process of upgrading the building's HVAC systems to become more energy efficient. And right now, Enbridge across Ontario is offering a plan for older homes to be fully deep retrofitted, including attic insulation, caulking, new doors, new windows. These are easily achieved energy savings, and it's something that we can put towards that help keep jobs here in Ontario. Windows are made here in Canada, doors are made right here in Canada, and the installation has to happen right here in Canada because that can't be outsourced anywhere else. So there's opportunities when it comes to natural gas, but I also want to make sure that those costs aren't just fully borne by people who are just trying to make ends meet and stay warm in their homes.
Thank you. Would you like to respond, Annamie?
Yes, there's no question that deep retrofits is one of the very best things that we can do in terms of helping to combat the climate emergency and keeping our global warming to, I mean, there's no acceptable level, but let's say 1.5 degrees or less. And so I'm fully in support of that. I wasn't really clear though from Brian's answer whether the NDP continues to support fracking or not in terms of the extraction of liquefied natural gas. As I understand they do, unless their policy is changed.
So when it comes to fracking, we all know what the science tells us on that, and it is dangerous, and it is a policy and a procedure that I don't support. Right now in Saskatchewan, that is a decision that will be put to the Saskatchewan voters in Saskatchewan, and they have an election day on the very same day as us. But when it comes to my personal support of fracking, it's not there. I don't support this. I don't support this practice, and I will advocate against it very strongly in an NDP caucus.
Thank you both. Okay. Premier Ford is asking the Government of Canada to subsidize the development of small modular nuclear reactors. Do you support Premier Ford's request? And would you support the installation of a small modular nuclear reactor in Toronto Centre? Brian.
Absolutely not. No nuclear, full stop. And it's ridiculous. So when I was at Greenpeace, one of the things that I wrote was the report against the refurbishment of the Pickering Nuclear A generating station, and that's the sheer amount of money that we're dealing with when it comes to nuclear energy is disgusting, and it is such a waste. And the fact that there has been no nuclear power in Ontario that has come under budget, and we continue to pay through the teeth for these things. I don't support small modular reactors. We saw the government has invested almost $500 million in the advanced CANDU reactors which didn't go anywhere. They're not marketable, so they didn't go anywhere. So that was all money that the government specifically spent that ended up going nowhere. So I don't believe that we should be spending that money anywhere else. There is only one place I would support investment in nuclear energy, and that is in nuclear waste. It is garbage and multi-generational issues that we have created at this moment, and we have to make sure that we have a safe investment and a way to contain this for thousands of generations into the future who shouldn't have to suffer because we got greedy with nuclear power here in Ontario. And absolutely not. Pickering is the only station that is built near such a major population center anywhere in the world, and that's absolutely unacceptable. So there should be no nuclear power here. And I'll add just one last thing for the audience. The zone of alienation is 30 kilometers away from Pickering. That brings you all the way to Yonge Street, which means all of Toronto Centre is included in the zone of alienation, which would be a problem in the event of a nuclear disaster at Pickering.
Thank you, Brian and Annamie. Yes. We're definitely in agreement on this one. I do not support small modular nuclear reactors. I know that there are people that see this as a great hope, and unfortunately we've had our government saying that this has to be part of the mix to get to our deep decarbonization. Our position remains the same, that that nuclear energy is very, very expensive to bring online. It takes a very, very long time to bring it online. We have not resolved the problem of how to adequately deal with nuclear waste. And so in terms of all of the other much better options that we have available to us, this is not the one that we should be considering in the mix. And, you know, you come back to, again, in terms of Toronto Centre, issues of environmental racism when you start to think about things like nuclear reactors. These sorts of facilities and other hazardous facilities are often placed in low-income, racialized communities across the country. And so, you know, this is for any number of reasons, it's really a non-starter. I think that's all that has to be said about that.
So it's, oh, Brian?
Yes, and I think the environmental justice issue is really important, and thank you for bringing that up, Annamie. And I think there are so many parts of our communities, including places in Scarborough, where nuclear waste was dumped during World War II and in the 50s and during the Cold War, and places where people don't have basements, and they don't know the reason why they don't have basements, and that's because the ground is irradiated, even though the soil has been removed. There continue to be spaces that should be and remediated, and again, that is something that I would push for, and that we have to make sure that we're not putting that burden on future generations, like so many other issues that we've seen, especially in the Indigenous communities that are dealing with the effects of industrial pollution by previous governments and Liberals and Conservatives over many years.
Annamie?
Agreed.
So it's fair to say neither of you would accept a small modular nuclear reactor in your riding.
No, thank you.
Okay. The government of Ontario is planning to increase the climate pollution from gas-fired power plants by more than 300% by 2025. What should the government of Canada do to promote the faster development of wind and solar energy in Ontario? Annamie.
We have, this is the thing I was most excited about talking about during the election, which is our chance of a lifetime to accelerate our transition towards a green economy, towards a net zero economy by creating a green economy. You know, we did not expect to be here, and we have paid a very, very high price for the opportunity, but we are going to have the opportunity in the months and years to come to use the hundreds of billions of dollars that we are definitely going to be spending to repair the economic and social damage in order to accelerate, to have a quantum leap forward in our move towards a net zero economy. And so that is where these investments come in. This is exactly the time that we should be planning for our investments in renewable energy, in clean tech, in becoming a world leader in these fields, not only because of what it does in terms of getting us to our greenhouse gas emission reduction targets, but also because this is where the future is. This is the future. There is no fighting it. There's no turning away from it. And it's a tremendous economic opportunity for our communities. And so we need to be all in on that. It is really a question of leadership. I was so disappointed not to hear any mention of that in the speech from the throne, which was supported by the NDP. We have got to get serious about our plans for a net zero future.
Thank you. Brian.
Thanks so much. So when we're thinking about how do we move towards a new future, then I want to make sure that people aren't getting stuck in just the weeds of what actually the international commitments are. That has moved several times. What we do want is to make sure that we're putting people on a trajectory that leads towards a just transition. And right now, people are stressed out. They're stressed out and they feel like they don't have the capacity to be able to make decisions that will benefit the environment. I'm thinking about my little niece in Surrey, BC, who can't play outside because of the climate fires. And she is 2.5 years old, and this has become the norm for her, that she doesn't realize that there is a difference. Like, there are just days when it's too dangerous for her to play outside. And that blows my mind, because we shouldn't have little children growing up with that kind of an environment going on. So when we're talking about climate pollution and kind of what other things the governments are doing, we have to think about what is the world that we're actually trying to do. And there are so many other issues there. And this is really where we differ from the Greens, is that the social issues aren't separate from a lot of the work that we're doing. So when we're talking about money laundering, when we're talking about putting a tax on the wealthy, when we're talking about a universal basic income, when we're talking about head-to-toe healthcare, including mental health care and supports for people who are dealing with the stress of climate emergencies and mental health issues associated with that, that all of this needs to happen as a whole. It can't happen in isolation.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, which is why, of course, in the 2019 election in Toronto Centre, I was really proud to represent our platform, which called for a guaranteed livable income. It called for universal pharmacare, universal post-secondary education, decriminalization of drugs, and the creation of a safe supply, and on and on. And often, unfortunately, during that election, I just heard crickets on the other side. So the Green Party understands that if we're people first, and that is what it is all about, that we have to tackle the two big crises, the two big challenges. On the one hand, completing our social safety net, and on the other hand, tackling the climate emergency. And there is no climate justice without social justice, so I stand by that.
Brian?
Yes, and I think there are some really exciting things that the New Democrats are putting forward, and I think it's really important. So we are the ones taking action on a universal basic income when it comes to the House of Commons. It's something that we're putting forward. Jagmeet is right across the country meeting with stakeholders and making sure that Indigenous peoples are consulted as well too. And I look forward to doing that work here in Toronto Centre with our urban Indigenous communities who don't have distinctions-based representation like other communities right across the country, and making sure that we make those connections between what's happening here in Toronto Centre. The opioid crisis is directly related to housing unaffordability, which is directly related to all of these multi-landlord corporations buying up property and holding it and leaving it vacant, which is tied to money laundering, which is tied to all of these issues we're having around crime. All of these cycles need to be looked at holistically, and I would love to do that work as a member of Parliament and make sure that people feel seen and their voices amplified in Ottawa.
Thank you both. Okay. What should Canada do to encourage more carbon capture and storage by our forests, wetlands, and farmlands? Brian.
Thank you for the question. So there's definitely a lot of opportunities that we have right across the country to be able to do this work. When so many of, there's no old growth in Southern Ontario. There's no forest in Toronto Centre, unfortunately. It's the reality of the area that we're living. But that isn't to say that we can't support that work elsewhere in the country and working with our partners in other parts of the province, especially in the north, to make sure that they have the resources that they need. We've talked about ambitious tree planting initiatives. It was actually the New Democrats that put that forward at first in 2019 election, and then the Liberals scooped that up. But again, they haven't followed through like they do with all of their plans. They say nice things, don't follow through. It is incumbent on us to do this work, to really work on carbon capture. And I know that there's been so much science on this. There's a lot of work and opportunity for us to do not only carbon capture, but how do we convert that? How do we take CO2 that's being produced or other greenhouse gas emissions and transform that into more usable materials or other kinds of substances that we can do? I know that research is being done right across the country. And that's also why it's important that we continue to fund centers of excellence into climate science, into climate energy, so that we're not having these kinds of ideas in isolation, that they are evidence-based, and that there are lots of great scientists right across the country and different universities working on this right now, and lots of promising opportunities as well too.
Thank you, Annamie.
Yes, there is tremendous, I love these win-win stories, I mean, planting trees and restoring our wetlands and having those do what they were intended to do, which is to capture carbon and to help clean our atmosphere and to make it more livable and prevent runaway warming. And so this is absolutely something, again, that as we talk about where is this money going to go so that it has the biggest impact and sets us up for the future, these are the areas that we really need to be considering and planning for and then implementing plans for. It's simply not good enough to say that we're going to plant billions of trees and then not do it. Because while those trees weren't being planted, the pandemic wasn't the excuse, because we continued to build pipelines out west during this same period. So I'd like to see our government putting as much effort into those big projects as they are into those damaging projects. And so the Green Party, our 2019 platform, and I assure you our next platform will talk a great deal about how we can, rebuild our natural worlds in a way that makes us better off, but also allows us to capture carbon. And then, Angela, we can be a world leader in carbon capture and direct air capture. We have some of the most innovative companies in the world working here. Those are the kind of investments we need to be looking at.
Thank you. Brian?
Yeah, I was like this is all very expensive, and there's a place for the federal government to play here. And when we're talking about remediation and restoration of lands, what we're seeing with fossil fuel subsidies is all of this money has gone into the creation of more extractive industry. But then when they go belly up, it's the people that are left on the line. It's going to be us that has to pay for Alberta to clean up the tar sands that are left abandoned. And there is so much work and so much money that's involved in that in that process. And we need to be able to make sure that we're working with transitioning workers towards that, so that they can start to do that work that are already in those places like Fort McMurray. And New Democrats will fight for that. But I think what's important here as well too is that we're making sure that the focus is on ambition. Like it's not just this and then we're done. It's what's next, what's next, what's next. It's not just a billion trees. It's about building climate resiliency right across the country so our communities are protected as we face more emergencies.
Thank you, Annamie.
Yep. I mean, I agree with that. And I think that Brian needs to pass that message on up the line, because I do not see that ambition in the NDP's plans. I don't see that ambition with the Liberals. And of course, at this moment, you know, the NDP is acting as a junior partner to the Liberals. And so if that's a message, and I think we both agree that that should be the message, we need political ambition, we need true leadership, we need a compelling narrative of how we're going to get from here to there. We really do need to send that message on up the line, because no one seems to be hearing it.
Okay, everybody, that's a wrap from my questions. So now we're going to take a few questions from the Zoom chat box, and Brad has been monitoring the Zoom chat box. So Brad, over to you.
Thanks for joining us today, folks. And there's been a lot of agreement as well as disagreement on this call. And so that leads to this question. This by-election is typical of so many contests through the years and across Canada, because the NDP and Greens split the progressive vote, which helps the Liberals and Conservatives. How would each of you react individually to the suggestion that the climate crisis calls for a new approach, like joining each party's efforts in targeted ridings? And I'll just leave it at that. I think you get the gist. Oh, sorry, Annamie, you are the first to answer this.
Okay, with pleasure. Thank you, Brad. So, I mean, there for those who have been following this and working on this for a long time, there is just the world of difference between our policies and the policies of the other parties. We remain the only party to have targets that correspond to the science. These are non-negotiable, and it's not political. It is what is required to protect our planet. And so until we can, you know, that's a red line for us. And so until we can get at least there, then we need to be able to offer that option to people in Toronto Centre and elsewhere in the country. And I would say in terms of Toronto Centre in particular, you know, I've been working really hard over the last week or so, and I'm sure we've all seen the stories calling for a suspension of this race. It should not be happening in a hot zone for COVID and the pandemic. We do not have the new Elections Canada rules in place. We're risking super spreader events. And I've asked every candidate to join me in a non-partisan or cross-partisan request to the Prime Minister. That is real representation, and that's the difference between our party and the others, at least at this moment.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you. So Annamie, I'm going to push back against that. So you instructed your caucus to vote against the throne speech, and then you are criticizing here for having a by-election. So you wanted the NDP to not support the throne speech, and then you're criticizing us for supporting it and averting election. So you can't have your cake and eat it. You have to choose. And what comes down to is making sure that the people of Toronto Centre have a voice. And right now they don't have representation because the previous Liberal representative for the area decided to just give up and leave in the midst of scandal. And I believe that our community deserves representation. It's one of the reasons why I'm putting myself forward here. And I don't think that this dichotomy of this is Green or NDP is effective or truthful. That what it comes down to is you have to be able to make to the people of Toronto Centre the best argument that you are the best person to be their representative. I'm happy. I've stood up every single time to make that argument, and I'm not asking you to step down. I'm not asking the other candidates to step down. I believe that it is incumbent on us in the service of democracy to stand up for everyday people and make sure that our voices are heard and that their voices are heard, and not to play in and not to have an anointing of a candidate in the back rooms of Ottawa.
Okay, let's go.
Sorry, is there a rebuttal?
Yeah, so let's do rebuttals, sure.
Yeah. So I agree with that. And I know that it's very difficult for people who belong to other parties to understand this, but I have no ability or capacity to instruct my caucus to do anything. It is, first of all, not my caucus. It is our caucus, and we operate by consensus. And there have been times where one person has voted for a speech from the throne and someone hasn't. So that did not happen. I also did not request anyone to stand down. But what I do know is that real representation in the context of Toronto Centre right now looks like not asking people in communities where 7 to 10% of people have been infected by the virus to go out under dangerous circumstances where they've been asked to stay at home to vote in an election that could be a super spreader event. That is not what free, fair, democratic elections look like. It's not political, it's just good common sense. And I ask you again, Brian, and the other candidates to join me.
Brian?
I'd like to clarify that my quote was misused in by the Greens in a tweet regarding a Marika Walsh article from the Globe and Mail. I'd like to flag that it is important. There are so many volunteers in my campaign and in other campaigns that are out there doing this work, and they're putting themselves out there because they see the value of democracy, and that people see that as well too. And it's why my campaign developed. The very first thing we did was develop a COVID-19 safety plan that involves all of the procedures that we could, including no door-to-door canvassing, to make sure that people are safe, especially in Toronto Centre, where so much of our community is vertical. And I know what that's like. I live in a condominium, right? Like the stress of trying to be in an elevator and then the door opens and somebody else gets inside. Like, and it's just, our communities are struggling right now. But what they need is a voice in Ottawa to be like, yes, we see you, we know you're struggling, and we're going to implement these policies to help make things better for you. And New Democrats have delivered on things like the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, and will continue to do so. And I hope people put their trust in me to fight for them in Ottawa.
Brad, do you have another question?
Yeah, that's a good follow-up to what we were just speaking about there. And I'd like to kind of roll a few questions together in this, so bear with me. Specifically, what are you going to do to help the people in Toronto Centre? On two aspects to that. One is dealing with what a lot of our inner city neighborhoods are dealing with, which is rampant gentrification, making it very difficult, cost of living and access to housing. At the same time, people want to do the right thing. They want to do efficiency upgrades and solar. These things are expensive, difficult to do up front. Some people may have the money, others won't. What tools do we have to help people do these things while also keeping our neighborhood affordable and livable for the widest spectrum possible?
And that would be to Brian.
Thank you for the question. So I'm not anti-development. There's a lot of opportunity that we have with development, especially making sure that we're working with developers and building owners to make sure that they're building exceptional buildings that are future-proof, that are energy efficient, that are energy producing, that have green roofs, that and include affordable housing. And this is something the New Democrats have fought for as long as New Democrats have been a thing, and that is for the right to be the focus on housing. Right now, the problem with the federal government is the focus on home ownership. And there's a very big difference between putting housing first and home ownership first. And New Democrats will always put housing first, because what matters is making sure that we have a mix of private ownership, but making sure that we have co-ops, making sure that we have apartments, purpose-built rentals, and inclusionary zoning, making sure that there is a minimum of affordable housing being built, rent geared to income housing, housing for LGBTQ2S+ people, housing for seniors, housing for those in need, the disabled, making sure that that's all part of every single building. I am the belief that if you want to build something in Toronto Centre, you should be willing to come to the table with affordable housing. Otherwise, I will stand up against you. And what we've seen is that the federal government's not willing to be that person. They're happy to sign off. They're happy to sign off on mortgages. They're happy to incentivize private home ownership. They're happy to incentivize the creation of new towers. And that is leading to gentrification. But like a community like Regent Park shows, gentrification doesn't need to go hand in hand with displacement. That really we can do those two things at the same time. It's not perfect, but it is a model for how we can continue to do development well in Toronto Centre.
Thank you, Brian. Annamie.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, you know, Toronto Centre is like a living laboratory for so many issues, and one of them, of course, is affordable housing. 90% of the people that live in Toronto Centre live in multi-unit dwellings. Most of those, over 80%, in high rises. And so when we're talking about retrofits, certainly there's no question there's going to be a role for government to play in that. We need incentives. We need, you know, all of the things, the whole packet. I mean, we talked about that in the last election. It's all the same things that we're going to talk about in the next one in terms of the incentives we can provide to the private corporations that own those buildings, to, you know, condo boards, et cetera, to get them to do the deep retrofits that allow us to contribute within our community to, you know, combating the climate emergency. And, you know, one of the things that I bring in terms of my lived experience to representing Toronto Centre is having lived in other cities that have done a far more successful job in finding ways to keep a mix of incomes, a mix of diverse backgrounds within even the most expensive neighborhoods within those cities. And it does have to do with regulation. It does have to do with insisting that development happens in a way that sets aside affordable housing and building affordable rental housing and supporting co-ops. So the solutions are there again. It's a question of political leadership, and Toronto Centre needs that the most.
Thank you. We have, oh, Brian.
Yeah, can I? Yeah. So I hear a lot of statistics and kind of ideas from Annamie, but one thing I think you're missing from is actually the lived experience of people who are in the riding. And it is our job to amplify those voices. And I think of my friend, Colin, who is disabled, who is on fixed income. And for the first time, he has managed to move into a larger space, but he can't afford that space in Toronto Centre anymore. So his home that is the place that is here is no longer his home because he had to move elsewhere in order to afford those things. These are the people, like we have MPP Suze Morrison for this area. Toronto Centre is the tenants critic for the area. And she's also was almost faced with rent evictions. So the issues are rampant, but there are people behind these statistics, and we have to be able to see those stories so that we can be the best advocates for them. So it's not just, for me, it's not just a statistic. These are people. It's myself trying to find somewhere to live. It's my friends trying to find somewhere to live and being priced out of their neighborhoods. It's LGBTQ2S plus seniors who in our neighborhood who can no longer afford to be here and feel unsafe elsewhere in the city. All of these stories need to be carried forward, and I'm happy to do that for Toronto Centre.
Thank you, Annamie.
I mean, that sounds like a great soundbite, but I don't know who Brian is talking about. I mean, I grew up six people in a 500 square foot apartment, sleeping on a fold-out bed. And I was born in Toronto Centre, and my mom taught in the schools there. My grandma was a frontline worker in Toronto Centre. So when I talk about the statistics, it's because many people don't know how tough life is for so many people in Toronto Centre. It actually shocks them. And so I want them to know that, you know, there are people that are truly struggling, that there are some things that are very unique about this riding that make, the necessity of having change urgent and immediate. And it's not because, you know, I got a good education and I'm able to talk in an evidence-based way that I've forgotten my roots at all.
Okay. What it comes down to is you've used this word laboratory.
Well, I think that the last word was mine in this instance.
Wow. Okay.
Thank you. So we do have time for one more question from the viewers. Brad?
All right. Our final question from the floor is, if you're elected, how will you push the government, or will you push the government to implement a Climate Accountability Act ASAP? That question should go to Annamie.
Okay. Thank you, Brad. So yeah, you know, this is like many things, whether we're talking about the climate emergency, climate accountability, whether we're talking about making good on the social movements to dismantle systemic racism that emerged this summer. So many of these things are going to require political leadership, but they're also going to require a mass mobilization of civil society. If you look at Canada, if you look around the world at where you finally get from the opposition to actual change, it's when you mix that opposition with proposition. And so for me, as the new leader of the Green Party of Canada, one of my biggest jobs is going to be tapping into organizations like yours building even ad hoc one-time alliances wherever possible to amplify the impact of your work, combine it with the actual tangible propositions so that we can get the change that we need. Civil society has an incredibly important role to play. The political side has a complementary role to play, and the more that we can create those alliances, the much more likely it is that we're going to get the change we need for Toronto Centre residents and people in Canada in general.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you for the question, and the answer is yes. We would implement a climate accountability office, like the Auditor General, like the Parliamentary Budget Officer. This would be an arm's length organization that is responsible directly to Parliament, not to the Prime Minister, not to Cabinet. And their job would be specifically to talk about and research and report on whether the entire government was meeting its climate needs and actually breaking that down. One of the things that we know is that the Department of National Defense is probably the largest contributor to climate to GHG emissions right across the country and internationally as well too. But we don't have that data because it's not something that's available to everyday Canadians to access or scientists in a lot of places. So a climate accountability office helps with the reporting. We have a good example of where that works here in Ontario with the Environmental Bill of Rights, where we have this public reporting process, which means that this stuff is brought out of the depths of Ottawa into the publicly accessible online, which means that we can hold governments accountable, not just now, and whoever the government is at this moment in time, but in the future, continuously over time. And this is modeled after work that Jacqueline introduced in 2006, prior to any Green MPs being elected in the House of Commons, as well as being brought forward again in 2011 by NDP MP Megan Leslie in Halifax. So there's a long legacy of New Democrats fighting for climate accountability, and I would push for that in Ottawa.
Annamie?
Yeah, well, first to be accountable, you have to have proper targets, and so we keep coming back to the same thing over and over again, which is that if we do not have the proper targets that correspond to the science and that we've been told are absolutely necessary to prevent runaway global warming, then there's little point in having an accountability office. So I am super supportive of ombudsmen, of accountability offices, of creating baselines that everything gets measured against, but we need to have the proper baselines. And so again, we are a party of cooperation, and when it comes to the climate emergency, I have no interest in playing politics at all. And so this is something where we would love to work in a cross-partisan, cross-cabinet way to set targets that correspond to the science and that we can all work towards meeting together.
I'm Brian.
Yes, thank you. So I didn't hear a commitment to something like a climate accountability office. I think I heard you say that you like the idea, and I hope this is a piece of the policy. You've talked about working across party alliance. I hope this is a policy that you'll be happily bring over to the Green side and help push for. And New Democrats would love to work with you on making sure that this comes forward. We've brought it forward several times in the past, like I've said, and we'll continue to do it in the future. And I think that's important, that we have these arm's length organizations that can look at the government as a whole and provide impartial evidence-based science on what's going on, so we can take appropriate action at that point.
Okay, you two, thank you so much. Can we move to closing statements now? Let's begin with Brian.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to everybody today. I really appreciate it. The environment is something that's really important for me. And like I mentioned, my little niece, Georgia, in Surrey, BC, dealing with the smoke. And it's something that I've been stressed out with for a long time. And I want to talk about eco-anxiety. And it's this idea that people feel stressed out to the point where they feel they can't take action as a result of the environment. And this is something that I want to overcome, that we can take individual action, that we can take action to elect people like myself, like New Democrats. I was selected by Our Time Canada, Climate Justice TO, and other organizations as their Green New Deal champion here in Toronto Centre. They met with all of the candidates, and of everybody they met with, I was the one that they chose to endorse. And I'm proud to have that endorsement and to carry that forward. And to make sure that I am there every step of the way to make sure that we're fighting for a just transition that puts everyday people first. The wealthiest people in Canada have made $37 billion over the course of this pandemic. Meanwhile, everyday people are struggling here in Toronto Centre. And I want to make sure that their voices are heard so that New Democrats who have done a great job fighting for policies that matter in Ottawa continue to put everyday people forward, even when the Liberals forget them, even when the Greens forget them, even when the Conservatives forget them. New Democrats will always be there for people who fall through the cracks. So thank you so much. Please be in touch. Visit brianchang.ca. And of course, tomorrow night, we have a great rally with Jagmeet Singh. Please go to my website, and it's free for anybody to come along to. I'd love to see you there. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Brian Chang. And Annamie, closing statement?
Well, thanks so much for having me today for this virtual event. I'm sorry that we're not able to have these events in person. And I'm hoping for a better day for all of us very soon. And so we hope for it, but then we also have to work toward it. And there is no question that when it comes to the climate emergency and tackling it, that what we are lacking now, unfortunately, is true political leadership. That applies to our government, unfortunately applies to the other political parties as well. Until we have targets that correspond to the science to reduce our greenhouse gases and meet our international obligations, then we are failing every single person in Canada. And during a moment where people are so concerned with their immediate urgent needs, it's exactly the time for political leaders to say, we've got this. We haven't taken our eye off the ball. You take care of what you need to, and we'll make sure that, when we're ready, we're gonna move down this path together. So this is a good news story if anyone is ready to tell it, and I'm ready to tell it. It's a story of how we build the economy of the future that's net zero, that sets up our future for future generations and creates the jobs of the future. People in Toronto Centre need that desperately. I repeat again, my final plea is to let's not have a super spreader event in Toronto Centre. Democracy demands a suspension until conditions are safe. And I again hope that the other candidates will join me in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian and Annamie, for sharing your fantastic ideas and your time with us. And I'd like to thank you both for your commitment to climate leadership. That was very evident today. We wish you both well in your race to represent Toronto Centre, with appreciation to you both.
Thank you. Thank you.
And for the benefit of Zoom and Facebook registrants, I will send you a YouTube link. I'm sorry to report that I wasn't successful at getting the Facebook live stream happening, and I'm not sure why. Maybe because I was recording on my computer, but I will send you a link. And to close, please enjoy this 3-minute song for the climate.
We need to start right now. is waking up, and change is coming whether you like it or not. Thank you.